Thank you, Anita. Thank you so much. I will mention flow chemistry as well, but anyway. So, well, good afternoon, actually. It's so nice, actually, to see 3D people, I'm going to actually say, after Damien. It's been a long time since, actually, we met the last time face-to-face, so I'm kind of delighted, actually, to be here. Yes, this is me. Thank you so much for all the kind of, enthusiasm and so on. But I really want to kind of talk to you about kind of a subset of my work, actually, and perhaps kind of a touch on some of the incoming kind of grants. Okay, so I decided to talk to you about mechanochemistry because mechanochemistry I've been doing, and I've been kind of looking into applications of this process in pharma for quite some time. So without really delay, I'm going to actually jump into this. So what is mechanochemistry? And mechanochemistry essentially is something very simple because mechanochemistry is really chemical synthesis, which is enabled or sustained by mechanical force. And it's quite easy to achieve, as you can actually see, if I can figure out which is, on a very small scale, so we can use milligram quantities, and just to see if something actually works, you can move into the gram quantities using a mill. But really, you can also have a mechanochemical process working really continuously, and you can really produce, if you wish, hundreds of kilograms. So it's quite a versatile process. However, it's quite sometimes difficult to predict what we're going to actually have at the very end. This is because actually mechanochemistry works through the activation of surface. And therefore, when you kind of detach molecules from the surface, they don't have the same mobility as in a solution. So quite often actually through mechanochemistry, we can obtain a product which we normally wouldn't actually be lucky to see or isolate from a solution. So this is really the kind of mechanisms how that actually works. I'm also presenting to you a symbol of mechanochemistry, which is essentially stacking 3 balls on each other. Actually, this seems to be quite well accepted by the researchers actually in the community. Now, mechanochemistry can, as it says, involves mostly milling, knead grinding, or sometimes, if you want, you can use a bit of solvent to induce the transformation. And we can run it at ambient temperature, or sometimes we use this thermomechanochemistry, so we can up the temperature to essentially make a product. But anyway, mechanochemical processes, because they either contain no solvent, or they're kind of a solvent poor, they would be regarded as environmentally friendly. So, moving on, mechanochemistry is not new. Mechanochemistry, I kind of pulled a few kind of accounts. So there is a kind of an unusual one. The first documented mechanochemical reaction, which is essentially, as you can see, this account of transforming cinnabar into mercury. But really, mechanochemistry was really the process of alchemists back a long time ago. So it's actually quite fascinating. Also, just to kind of tell you, back a few years ago in 2019, IUPAC identified mechanochemistry, which is called reactive extrusion, along with flow chemistry, as key, essentially, chemical innovations that would actually change our world. So this is something which, well, mechanochemistry certainly, it's worth considering. And also mechanochemistry would actually fall quite nicely into this, and that was presented at the beginning. I think Damien actually had that in slide, and essentially this is pretty much the synergy with the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe. It has 4 pillars, and one of them essentially is this, which is the development of high quality, safe, effective, and greener medicine. So we can actually agree that perhaps mechanochemistry, although it's not going to solve all our problems, it's something which is worth considering. In the context of the research that my group would actually do, and Anne-Marie was actually talking about, improving poor properties of active pharmaceutical ingredients, and that's pretty much, I'm a pharmacist by training, and to me, the quality and the development of efficient medicines is something which is really, really important. So the group actually initially was working on some kind of APIs which would actually have, for instance, poor solubility. And we kind of transform those APIs into multi-component systems. And we all know multi-component systems quite well. For instance, we know salts, we know co-crystals, that was mentioned quite a few times already, solute dispersions, which will be non-crystalline. But, well, see if we can apply mechanochemistry to those. So I just wanted to bring your interest into really two classes of those multi-component systems, which will be quite unusual. I typically don't do usual things. So, and there was just want to kind of bring your attention to research on ionic liquids, which we did over the past few years, quite a lot of that, and also polymeric salts. Mechanochemistry would actually work in a way that we can take the API, we can process that either with small molecule, so we can actually see if you replace the small molecule with a large molecule, which is a polymer, and especially when it's charged, we can actually get those two classes of the multi-component systems, and you can actually see why mechanochemistry, because in our case, essentially would be a high energy process. We have 100% conversion, there is no solvent, and essentially we have something which has far more improved properties than the starting API. Okay, I'm gonna check the time. Still on time. So when we started the work on ionic liquids, and that the work was actually done to the Career Development Award that I got from SFI a few years ago, which the project came to an end, we didn't realize how complicated that family could be. Because, well, the definition says one thing, and ionic liquids would be defined as salts with low melting points or glass transition temperatures. This is not exactly the case, and I wouldn't agree with that definition at the point. Unfortunately, when you have something with a low melting point, or sometimes the melting point is so low that you go into this kind of liquid state, you can have something which would be equivalent of a salt, which would be kind of fully ionized, or on the other end, you have no proton transfer, deep eutectic mixtures, but we also have those oligomeric ionic liquids. And that would actually complicate the situation, because with those systems, there is no really a complete proton transfer. Sometimes you get those protons get kind of a caught in the middle of the transformations, and therefore those actually systems will actually have completely different properties. So just to kind of fly through some of the work, actually this is all published, whatever I'm presenting at the moment. So we took lidocaine and we mechanochemically reacted that with a number of dicarboxylic acids. And the funny thing actually, some of the systems, it's like a magic, okay? Lidocaine is a white crystalline powder. All of those acids, whether this is glutaric or pimelic or suberic, are actually white crystalline powders. You put them into a mortar and pestle. This is just to kind of show you how they look like. You turn the pestle a few times, it takes a few seconds, and then you have something which turns magically into, well, obviously not magically, there is a science behind it. It turns into a liquid. The science behind it is the transformation really is through this kind of a submerged eutectic as an intermediate. But this is only half of the story, because that submerged eutectic would imply that you have no proton transfer, but you do have it in this case. So this is the mechanism of transformation, is something which is very important. We also use, and some of the techniques were presented previously, we do actually quite a lot of thermal analysis. We can construct loads of kind of phase diagrams giving us idea about the thermodynamics of the systems. If you're very lucky, you can sometimes crystallize those actually systems, but it takes a lot of time. And I have noticed in literature, people usually don't have the patience to wait 2 years for something to crystallize. Well, if you have a PhD student who is actually working for 4 years, they can do it. But we also noticed what actually happens in the crystalline state and what happens in this kind of liquid, sometimes supercooled state, is completely different. They have different properties. What is actually important, and this is what I mentioned, sometimes those systems don't really have full proton transfers. We can, of course, use infrared spectroscopy to tell us if the system is ionized or not, maybe partially ionized. But we need some more sophisticated tools, and this is done through collaboration, because we don't have actually this high-tech technology, really. And that was kind of determination through the electric spectroscopy, which would look into the conductivity versus viscosity of the system, so we can actually conduct this Walden plot. We did that for our systems, and what normally happens, those organic-based ionic liquids would actually fall into this group of poor ionic liquids. However, what we observed actually was something which was quite unusual. And at room temperature, especially the one which is the hemiglutarate, which is kind of pointed here, at room temperature actually exhibited this kind of super ionic protic, essentially, properties. That's quite unusual. Maybe someone who actually is working in energy could actually explain that to us. However, we didn't actually see the proton decoupling. Sometimes we can actually see that for those systems, but that was just simply gratuitous kind of a mechanism of proton hopping through the H network. That's what it is. Now, and this is what I said. If you're very, very patient, sometimes you can actually force those systems to crystallize. And that was in this case. Azelaic acid was another one that we actually took and reacted with lidocaine. In this case, the phase diagram is actually quite complex, and we were able to distinguish two different phases depending on the composition. And those two phases were in the crystalline state. There was a co-crystal which formed when the composition was rich with lidocaine, and then there was ionic liquid when you had a bit more acid. However, what happened in this liquid state was completely different. So we managed to resolve the structures, although really it took a long time for that. And there is a co-crystal. Okay, co-crystals are co-crystals, okay. But we also resolved the structure of this kind of ionic liquid. And very unusually, this is really the first ever structure of oligomeric ionic liquid in the crystalline state, which is actually based on a dicarboxylic acid. It's a very unusual 2 to 3 stoichiometry system, and we were actually quite surprised. We had a bet with the PhD student, I have to say, and none of us actually won this competition. There were only two ways, but we didn't expect that. In the liquid state, in the supercooled state, liquid state, again, the dominated composition was 1-to-1. So depending really on the solid state, you can have different properties. Okay, so this work led to many different publications, as you can actually see, and that was the team. Anne-Marie mentioned we were kind of a female-heavy team. My team working on that CDA was essentially purely female. Even we had next generation. This is Natasha. Nina is missing. Nina is the second edition. And we're continuing the work currently with Maria. Anne-Marie mentioned it's funded through CGT. Maria has a poster tomorrow and is sitting there. I can see her. So you can actually have a look and ask Maria how she's doing. And then we have 2 new students, Yuri and Anna, working on one of them. Yuri is working on my Provost Award, and Anna is working on the Panist program, PhD program. So here it is. We published one work. I might just skip that, but we part of the work actually was published as a special issue. That was a special issue which just finished, really. And that was a special issue between the molecular pharmaceutics as well as crystal growth and design. There was 4 of us working on that. Okay, very briefly, how we are with time? Okay. Very briefly going through and flying through, because this is something which really was funded to the previous phase of SSPC. And this is the work on amorphous polymeric salts, which we continue in this phase of SSPC. So some of those molecules are quite nasty. And when I say nasty, I would say ciprofloxacin actually belongs to the BCS class 4, has poor solubility, poor permeability. And the initial idea was to make solid dispersions, amorphous solid dispersions. But that molecule didn't want to actually form solid dispersions at all, even with a very powerful polymer, which is PVP. PVP actually is known to be kind of a solid dispersion forming polymer. It didn't want to. However, the molecule, so as we can actually see, there was no amorphization. This is what we expected. Nothing really happened. But only when we used acidic polymers, for instance, Udragit, and there was a carbopol, there's HPMCAS, we noticed that ciprofloxacin very happily actually formed amorphous powders. We didn't know initially what it was, But in this case, ciprofloxacin behaves as a cation, with the polymer being the anion. This is why we actually call them amorphous polymeric salts, because they pretty much, they're based on the same construct as a salt. We managed to, we saw different, essentially, mechanism of release. We actually saw that there would be, some of those actually systems would be more potent. In vitro, we kind of did some bacteria test. And so that was work of Hanna Mesalati, and this is her publications. And I'm just gonna mention Lina, who is funded through the current phase of SSPC, working happily with very complex amorphous polymeric salts, because she decided to use 2 polymers and the drug, so there will be 3 component systems. But Lina, actually, I just like that photo because Lina just completed industrial placement in Zentiva in Prague. She's away currently, taking a break, a very well-deserved holiday. And also, she did participate in this kind of a mechanochemical challenge and got 3rd place. So well done to Lina. Okay. Now, what I just want to kind of in the next few minutes, really couple of minutes, to say is essentially collaboration and how collaboration can work in your favor and how collaboration can enhance your research. There's no point in fighting because collaboration can actually get you further, and this is one of the good examples. So a few years ago, I joined this cost action. This is cost action Mechanochemistry for sustainable industry. We managed to have one face-to-face meeting before the pandemic. Then the pandemic happened. We maintained the contact through, obviously, online conferences, different seminars, and so on. So the 2 ladies, Evelina Colacino, who is from University of Montpellier and is in charge, essentially, she's the boss. And Lucia Maini, who actually I also presented her work on the alchemy. She kind of is interested in the history of mechanochemistry, is essentially the vice chair of this. But an opportunity came last year through the very new Horizon Europe, and the collaboration to the cost materialized and got extended further actually through this project, which is called Impactive. And this is innovative mechanochemical processes to synthesize active pharmaceutical ingredients. This is our logo. This is really the call. So this is the Green Pharmaceuticals call. Of course, not the whole cost action applied for that. There were actually, we had the process of selecting the partners, and you can actually see who is involved, although with a few changes. The UK is out, okay? Brexit, not only Brexit, but there is Agatha, who moved from the UK to Spain. So Spain now, it's an active partner. And also Johnson Matthey, unfortunately, they kind of sold the health division, and they're no longer actually in the grant. But here it is, and this is what really Impactive is about. It would address those kind of challenges, which is shortage of medicine, poor crisis preparedness. We all are still in the pandemic. And the background was essentially 2 cost action, mainly the Mexus, but Greenering also participated. And this is essentially what we're gonna actually do. That photo that you see in the corner, actually, so this is Evelina, this is Francesco De Logo, and this is me. We spent last summer essentially a few months working on that project with all the partners and trying to essentially write a proposal. And every year I tell to myself, I'm gonna have a great summer next year. It didn't happen this year, but I'm gonna say I'm gonna have a great summer next year. So we'll see what grant application is gonna happen on the way. So this is what we actually do. It has a few scientific work packages, so it's the kind of discontinuous, continuous processing, multi-component forms and formulation. This is my favorite work packages because I'm leading on it with a colleague, which is Vania André from University of Porto. And then we have kinetics and reaction mechanism, scale-up and life cycle, and so on. We have a great advisory board as well. John Warner, who is the founding father of green chemistry as well, if you ever heard about mechanochemistry, you probably heard about Tomislav Frišić as well. So that's what it is, the news. And last but not least, and I know Peter is somewhere, this is our MSD kind of collaboration. This is, just want to say, this is SSPC Collaboration. Yeah, I can see Peter sitting there. This is SSPC Collaboration because collaboration can get you really far, as I said. And collaboratively, we were working with MSD on this, really, the Friedel-Crafts acylation reaction. Peter is the brain of the project. As I said, I'm only Hans. Peter is the brain. But we have great collaboration. There is Anita Tajber, Mike Zawarotko. So this is a great collaboration. And I have no conclusions, but my conclusion from today would be, in SSPC, we have a great critical mass of people kind of working on flow chemistry, mechanochemistry, loads of other green processes. So I think the future is bright in the area of sustainability, really, that we should probably address a bit more. Okay.